Now joined by the insiders, Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun. Guys, based on today's practice, it does not look like the Leafs are planning any lineup changes for Game 5, despite losing 2 in a row. Chris, are you surprised?
Well, the reason I'm maybe not quite as surprised is because Craig Berube just has not been a tinkerer. You look through these playoffs, he's made one player substitution the entire time. Nick Robertson started the series among Toronto's 12 forwards. Eventually, Max Pacioretty was brought in Game 3 against Ottawa. And since that period of time, he's run with the same skaters in each of the games. And so, I think the Leafs look at where they're at 2-2 in this series against the Panthers and like a lot of what's happened, see areas to improve on in the last game. But they want to win with the lineup that's been winning for them. And so, we'll see if maybe there's an adjustment made still prior to the game. There's an extra day here for the coaching staff to look things over. But Craig Berube is a steady hand, and I think he wants to keep a steady message for the team.
And, I'm just going to add that, speaking to someone about the team charter back home from Florida on Tuesday, that the Leafs, you wouldn't have thought that they had lost 2 games in a row. And I think it feeds off the head coach, Craig Berube, that there was a very calm atmosphere on that flight, that no sense of panic. And I think that feeds into what you just talked about. Don't start panicking about the lineup. 2-2 against the Stanley Cup champions, 2 of 3 at home. The Leafs feel they're in a good spot here.
And they feel like they know what needs to be better in Game 5. Discipline, a parade to the penalty box in Game 4. Pierre, what were you hearing about that today?
Yeah, well, you saw that chat that Craig Berube had with Max Domi at the end of practice. We're not going to pretend to guess what that chat was about. We know how the game ended. We know that Max Domi's taken some penalties in these playoffs. But discipline is important. I chatted with Morgan Riley after practice, and he said, it's a fine line for them, especially against the Florida Panthers. Because on the one hand, yes, turn the other cheek, which the Leafs have a lot in this series. They have been disciplined, especially in the first 3 games. But on the other hand, Morgan Riley said you don't want to back away from the Florida Panthers either, that there are times in the game where physically you need to respond and send a message as well. I thought it was interesting to get in his mind that way, because that's the line that every Leaf player is trying to walk, that we're not going to get bullied by you guys, but at the same time, we don't want to be in the penalty box.
Well, they certainly weren't stirring the pot during their media sessions today. Max Domi not really getting into what happened with Alexander Barkov at the buzzer. Mitch Marner not really addressing the Dmitry Kulikov elbow. There was some good news on the injury front for the Leafs today. We see Anthony Stolarz back on the ice. Chris, what are you hearing about his status?
Well, it's the first time we've seen him on the ice. Don't believe it's his first time actually skating, which, again, is even more good news. If he skated and has continued to skating, it would suggest that he's working his way through the progression that has to go through when you're returning from a head injury here. And so, the Leafs yet aren't saying when the best case scenario is on when we might see Stolarz, but, there's a pretty clear progression laid out for any player that's dealing with this kind of injury in terms of the steps that he needs to follow. And given that we're now 8 days since the initial impact where he left that Game 1 against the Panthers and had to go to hospital, and he's taking these steps. I mean, I would say that he is getting closer and closer, assuming there's no kind of setbacks here, to being able to play, which of course brings an interesting discussion point, because when he gets healthy enough to play, and depending on when that is, do the Leafs want to play him? Because Joseph Woll obviously is coming off a great start in Game 4.
Yeah, Chris, exactly. And I was thinking, to me, it feels like an in-between series decision for them if they can get through this series against the defending Cup champions. Because, on the one hand, you should never lose your net as a starting goalie because of injury. And if he's healthy, you would think it's his turn to be back in. But this season was always set up as the hot hand between these 2 goalies, a 1A, 1B situation. Joseph Woll has been outstanding since coming in for Stolarz in this series. There's no scenario that I can see where, if he keeps playing the way he is, that Stolarz gets back in this series. It doesn't make sense to me.
We'll see what happens in Game 5, though. I mean, you got to judge, as you go right through here. So
we know it's Woll's net right now. I asked him about seeing Stolarz back out there. He says it's a nice little morale boost.